I am sick and tired of so many people online all doing the same thing. Of all of them, of each and every single one of them, all committing the exact same sin time and time again. The sin of neglecting and tarnishing the reputation of the three most magnificent games ever created by RGG Studio: Judgment, Lost Judgment, and Like a Dragon Gaiden. Now, I obviously like to exaggerate a lot, which I know saying that will surprise an incredibly large number of people, and that's because admittedly these three games are just my three favorites. But far too often I see in all sorts of different situations these three games just being kicked out of conversations and whatnot, and I think it's quite frankly stupid. You can argue all you want that something's better than them or whatever, but there's no denying that these three games suffer the most undeserved neglect from the community and even their own freaking creators, and you'll see what I mean throughout the video. To start though, I understand that there may be some people watching this that'll not really know about these games, in particular the Judgments, and if that's true, well then that's the exact point of this video. Judgment released exclusively on the PS4 back in December of 2018 in Japan and June of 2019 everywhere else, being after the release of Yakuza Kiwami 2, but before Yakuza Like a Dragon. It was a spin-off of the Yakuza series, but not like the recent Like a Dragon Ishin, where it plays similarly but everything else is different, but instead it's all the exact same as the games that came before it, only without any of the characters from the main series. So still the same setting, gameplay, visuals, and so on, just with a new set of characters and obviously a new story and music. Then a few years later, Judgment got a remastered version, which was just the exact same thing, only with a different lighting scheme and a higher frame rate, which allowed the game to come to PS5, as well as bridging over to Xbox. Then later in the same year, we got the release of its sequel, Lost Judgment. Lost Judgment's release was actually a big deal, as it was the very first time that the series had a simultaneous worldwide release, being in September of 2021. It was also the first time that the series had a simultaneous console release, being released on PS4 and 5, as well as Xbox One and Xbox Series. Now, you could actually view Yakuza Like a Dragon as the first game to have a simultaneous console release, but it was actually a PS4 exclusive and a Japan exclusive back in the start of 2020, and then when it eventually came to the rest of the world, it released at the same time on Xbox and PC as well. Eventually, both Judgments came to PC towards the end of 2022, but then came Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name, which has a stupidly long name, so I'll just be calling it Gaiden. But anyway, it released simultaneously worldwide in November of last year, and it released on both PlayStations, the 3 Xboxes, as well as PC. However, Gaiden's release is the first thing I'm going to discuss with this video, because it never once stood a chance to gain the recognition it deserved. Now, it didn't fail financially or anything, or at least I don't think it did. It was very much enjoyed by those who played it, with it always having an overwhelmingly positive rating on Steam, for example, but the critics weren't as kind for some reason. Previously, the only games in this series to not have at least an 80 on Metacritic were Yakuza 1 and 2, both versions of Yakuza 3, both versions of Yakuza 4, Yakuza Dead Souls, and Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise. Now, 78 isn't a bad game, and it's still a green number for a website like Metacritic, but are you seriously telling me this game is as good as Yakuza 4 and worse than the PS3 version of Yakuza 3? Well, as we all know, IGN is indeed an incredibly elaborate prank on the games industry, so whatever, we can ignore what the critics say for now. Because the next people I'm going to be pointing fingers at are Sega themselves. Leading up to its release, they did a not very good job at selling the game. Well, by that I mean they made everyone very aware of the game, and I'm sure their marketing helped to sell a lot of copies, but they massively hurt the reputation of the game. The whole lead up was a lot of Sega basically saying, hey guys, this is just going to be a small game, nothing crazy. It tells a story that's in between two other stories, so it's not like it's going to have a particularly interesting story. It's also going to be super short because we made it in 6 months or whatever, like crazy short. Oh, and also day one on Game Pass because we don't expect people on Xbox to buy it. Oh, and also Infinite Wealth comes out 2 months after it. Huh, guys, Infinite Wealth. Woo! Whereas in reality, what they should have said is, hey guys, this game's going to make you bawl your eyes out like a little bitch, plus the combat makes every other game with playable Kiryu look like shit, plus there's actually like 700 minigames to play, plus the story is short because we have literally cut out all of the bullshit, plus it's not actually that much shorter than a lot of our other games, like it's only a couple hours shorter than a lot of them. But no, they said none of that. And so still to this day, over half a year later, I see people constantly regurgitating the same false bullshit that gets spread around in online communities, thanks to critics and thanks to Sega. Many people who have never played it just push it aside as a side story that takes 2 minutes to finish and has nothing of value to it. I personally know people who intentionally skipped it as well because they thought it wasn't going to make up for the money spent, and they would rather have spent it on Infinite Wealth, which again came out only 2 months later. Infinite Wealth, another great game, ended up becoming a massive hit for the studio, selling over 1 million million copies pretty damn quickly. It was a game that they were working on for many years, and around the time of Gaiden's development, they had pretty much completed it, so even though Gaiden released first, it was actually made second. Now, I'm not angry about Infinite Wealth's success or anything. In fact, I'm really happy about how popular the game was. I understand too that if Gaiden became insanely popular but Infinite Wealth tanked, then that would have been an incredibly detrimental thing for Sega. But I really feel like they just expected Gaiden to flop. They thought that probably only a few people would care, realistically just being the people who hate the new turn-based games and just want the classic gameplay, or the die-hard fans or whatever. They downplayed the shit out of the game, and they even did a series first and bundled it with a demo for the next game that was soon going to come out and completely overshadow it. Now, that was definitely a good idea to spark some interest in people who were immensely excited to try Infinite Wealth, but it created the opportunity for many people to just beat Gaiden and play just the demo and completely forget about Gaiden. At the very least, the Japanese Sega team still makes posts about Gaiden, and on the Western team's side, they will frequently promote it and Infinite Wealth in various community posts whenever the games are involved in sales. But the reason the Western team don't really talk about it now is because they're trying their best to hype up the two Kiwamis for the TV show, because I guess that TV show is just going to pretend Zero doesn't exist and it just will be stuff from the first two games, but I guess we'll see. They also released a bunch of new bundles, one of which being a starter bundle that doesn't have Zero, which is so dumb. But that's irrelevant, because the even bigger sin is that none of these bundles include either Like a Dragon Ishin or Like a Dragon Gaiden. They're both brand new 2023 games and whatever, yeah, but Infinite Wealth in a bundle, being basically the turn-based bundle. And now you're chucking Ishin into this mess by ignoring it too? Like, surely Gaiden and or Ishin could have been in a spin-off bundle, and it would have made perfect sense. Chuck Gaiden into the complete series. Another post-release problem that the game faced was that for whatever undisclosed reasons, the English dub of the game had to be delayed until after the game was released, and was then added in a post-launch update. Now, just to remind everyone for the 800th time, I never played the game in English, but every game sells better, even if by a little bit, by having regional dubs. That's why Ubisoft dubbed their games in every single language ever. So it not releasing with that may have been a deal breaker for some, but for others it was a point of criticism and an opportunity to point and laugh at everyone involved, further impacting the overall perception of the game to many newcomers, or at least those who haven't played it. But the final nail in the coffin, which only affects the Western side, although as we know that's like a majority of the audience, was that there was no physical release for Like a Dragon Gaiden on any platform in the West. Now, these days, a majority of people do just go digital only. It's much easier and there's significantly less hassle in organizing a digital library of games compared to a physical one. I mean, Judgment on PS5 is the only modern English Yakuza game I own, but problems arise from that. Literally a few days before I was typing this part out in my script, I was at a used game store and thought to myself, if I ever see a copy of Gaiden on the Xbox, I'm actually going to grab it, because, I mean, I may as well. And then suddenly it hit me that that's not a thing. In fact, because there are a total of 2 Xboxes in all of Asia, there doesn't exist a physical Xbox version at all, I don't think. My brother went on a holiday to Japan shortly after Gaiden release, and he actually grabbed me a copy of the game on PS5, so I was fortunate that I didn't have to go through 100 hurdles to own the game physically, and I beat the entire thing again on my PS5 with no problems at all, because the disc has the full English version of the game on it. But with something like the PS5 version of Judgment, I only own it because I was just walking past an EB Games and I saw it on the shelf on sale, so I thought, you know, why not? But there's no chance for that, which makes me ask again, why wasn't this released physically in the West? I'll tell you why, because again, Sega fully believed it would flop, and perhaps there are other reasons, but they probably didn't want to spend the money exporting physical copies to America and Europe and whatever out of fear that they wouldn't get their money back. All of this stuff just unintentionally gives Gaiden this negative reputation to people who haven't played it, that it's a quick time and money waster, and for people who have played it, general discussions in the community, their own preconceived or even post-conceived notions, and Sega's lack of attention to the game just make it so that it's thrown in a bin to be forgotten. Die-hard fans like me will talk about it, but most people have completely turned a blind eye to the game now, which is absolute piss, because god damn, it was so much bloody fun. It was the first game I was fully willing to do an entire second playthrough of, purely for my own enjoyment, being my playthrough on PS5, which I did about a month after it released. If I could have had more fighting styles, or even if I just had the ones from Lost Judgment, I can tell you right now that it would have been up there in the Louvre, or how you pronounce it, as one of the greatest video games of all time. I get that it's not a very good entry point for the series, despite what Sega said, relying very heavily on knowledge from other games, but for the fans, this is truly one of the best games to pick up. But speaking of what Sega said, it's time to talk about the exact opposite, being what Sega hasn't said. What haven't they said, you might be wondering? Well, they haven't said bloody anything about the two Judgment games for like a century. Now look, something that I haven't mentioned is that the Judgments are treated like their own thing that is completely and utterly separate from the Yakuza / Like a Dragon series. But like I said earlier in the video, it's pretty much like playing the start of Yakuza 4 where everything's the same, but there's just no older characters. The protagonist, Takayuki Yagami, had his face modeled after a famous Japanese actor, Takuya Kimura. Kimura was a part of this shitty talent agency called Johnny & Associates, and it's a long story, but basically because his face was in the game, they had a bunch of restrictions that they had to worry about, otherwise they wouldn't be allowed to use Kimura anymore. This actually sourced the biggest reason as to why Judgment and Lost Judgment took so long to come to PC. The talent agency didn't want people to mod Kimura's face and whatever other bullshit. I mean, fair, but at the same time, you can download a mod that replaces Yagami with his original design before he was Takuya Kimura and play with the English dub, and then boom, no more Kimura. So, like, what are you stressed about, Johnny? But around the time of the releases for Judgment, Judgment Remastered, Lost Judgment, and its DLC expansion, the Kaito Files, Sega were ranting and raving about the games, as one might expect. But it took no time at all for both the Western social media team, and surprisingly even the Japanese social media teams, to go radio silent on anything to do with Judgment. Remember how I said earlier that they always make sure to mention what games are on sale? Well, I've still got Lost Judgment on my PlayStation account's wishlist, and I get notifications like once a bloody week that Lost Judgment is on sale. I've seen the Ultimate Edition of the game go on sale for like $20, and that's Australian dollars, by the way, which for context is like 1 US cent. And I'm not sure if that's always the same on Xbox, but on PC as well, the game is constantly on sale. Judgment 2, I bought the Xbox version of Judgment during one of its many sales. But even recently, when Sega did a sale of all of their games, besides 0, for probably a very specific reason, they made sure to mention every game besides the two Judgments. I mean, the people responsible for RGG's Western social accounts that I know of, good old Brent and Carlos, I absolutely love. They're super awkward and goofy, but I love them regardless. Carlos doesn't follow me on anything because he's clearly too stunned by how insanely handsome I am or something, but those blokes clearly love the games, and with stuff like that Anime Expo event recently, they're doing the right stuff. But surely one of them could like subtly mention the Judgments in some way. Like, maybe they really well and truly aren't allowed to for legal reasons, but like just put a photo of Kaito on Twitter with a mirrored Judgment logo and just make the caption say sale. I don't know. It's just weird. It feels like Sega had nothing to do with the games, even though they literally made them. Hell, even the announcement of the Judgment PC ports was done just shortly after RGG Studios' first ever RGG Summit, which was a super big milestone event for the studio. They weren't announced at that event. No. They were just subtly mentioned by one of the Sega Twitter accounts as like oh hey, by the way, they're on Steam now. I mean, how lame is that? So many people finally had the chance to play these games and they released to no fanfare, to the point where, still, to this day, I see people boasting their collections of the whole series, and there's always 2 games that are absent. Now look, if you haven't bought either game for a perfectly valid reason, that's perfectly fine. If you don't want to spend the money or you feel you're too busy to play them or something, I'm not trying to shame you. I still firmly believe as well that everyone should ignore the dickheads online who insist that you have to play every single game in the series or else you're a fake fan or something. But I will say that Sega's neglect of the Judgment games are actually the smallest problem. And that's because the biggest perpetrators of the unjust treatment of 2 of the best Yakuza games are quite plainly the community. The first thing is how there are so many morons who somehow can look at both games and say that they aren't Yakuza games. I made a video last year that was pretty much just half an hour of me talking about why I love Lost Judgment, and I titled it The Best Yakuza Game. A statement that, in my eyes, has yet to be proven wrong. But you have no idea of the amount of responses I had of people saying that it's not a Yakuza game. If you mean it's not called a Yakuza game, then yeah, you're absolutely right. But that's not what people meant. Another thing I see that's in response to one of my videos, or simply something I said once, is people just being plainly wrong about something from the Judgment games. Not something like someone saying, oh, this feature was introduced in Judgment, but they were wrong because it was actually a Lost Judgment thing, because whatever, who cares? But I mean the sort of people who try to be perceived as experts just saying shit that's not true. And these sort of people are the people who just spam the shit out of sites like Reddit and Twitter, and either flood the sites with stuff that's wrong, or a post they're wrong about goes viral, and stuff like that floods the minds of the masses. Now, I'm not at all an expert, I'm wrong all the fucking time, but these people just misinterpret things like the story. They misunderstand the motives and actions of the main antagonist of Lost Judgment. They downplay the significance of Yagami's achievements in both games, so on and so forth. But then there's the gameplay too. They haven't physically played either game, so they're completely missing out on how much goddamn fun they both are, or don't understand how things work. They're just quite simply wrong. And it's not a situation of them playing the game and misremembering or just having a weird opinion. It's because they've not taken the chance to bother playing either game, and so all of their information is just taken from people who also haven't played either game. It's like sitting in a circle in primary school playing Chinese whispers, but the first dipstick kid got the bloody phrase wrong, and so now everyone else is wrong. Some of these people, though, refuse to play the game because when the judgments were new and popular, they weren't on PC. So when the community get together to discuss things, there was a whole let's not talk about it notion that got passed, and people just drilled that into their heads. We can't talk about it because we can't play it. Oh, but now we can play it, but I don't know what to talk about, so I'm going to either rely on osmosis or make shit up. But there's another reason that only affects a specific kind of person, being the really weird people who are really obsessed with specifically Kiryu. I get he's the most iconic figure of the series, and we all love him. I mean, Gaiden wouldn't have made me cry so much if I didn't, but you've probably seen it yourself, or you're someone who's guilty of it, where they will outright refuse to play a game because it doesn't have Kiryu in it. I've seen some people get mad that Yakuza 4 starts with Akiyama, some random dude, and they get even more mad when they realize that you have to get to the 4th part of the game before you can play as Kiryu, which is dumb, because the first 3 parts of Yakuza 4 are the best parts of Yakuza 4, but whatever. These people also give up once they get to the 2nd part of Yakuza 5, not realizing that Shinada's the best part of the game. I'm right, shut up. Some of these people very much are the turn-based bad people as well, but of course the ones that aren't skipped the hell out of Yakuza Like a Dragon, but were oh so excited for Infinite Wealth, until they realize that it's like halfway through the game that Kiryu becomes the second protagonist, and even then you spend an immense chunk of gameplay playing as Ichiban, so of course they hated it. And so do you think that they would even bother touching 2 games that have not a single reference to Kiryu beyond some attack animations of his appearing in them? Of course they didn't. These people are also the same people who would click on a video analyzing who would win in a fight between Yagami and Kiryu, not realizing that YouTube has a feature where you can set multiple thumbnails to a single video and it randomly selects which thumbnails to show people. By the way, here's thumbnail 1 and here's thumbnail 2. But anyway, a lot of people intentionally chose to ignore the part where I said Kiryu would win because of course it was at the end, after the point where I, the guy who's played a shitload of Judgment and lost Judgment, accurately pointed out how weirdly overpowered Yagami is in both gameplay and story. But no, my beloved Kiryu isn't weak, this can't be. No, he's not weak, but again, Yagami is just fucking dummy overpowered, which you would know if you've played either of his games. But so many comments that made me facepalm were like 50% people just not paying attention to the video. Like, Tybell, I'm looking at you, dude. I said in the video that the War God Talisman only charges your heat outside of extreme heat, but also Yagami has the War God Talisman, but of course it's not a permanent piece of equipment because it's an extract or whatever. The other 50% are, again, people just being wrong. I get it's a meme, I fully get it, but there are people out there that genuinely use the Tiger Drop negates all damage as an actual argument, and people say Kiryu could Tiger Drop Yagami, but Yagami has Tiger Drop. Can you guess what I'm going to say in response to that? But beyond that, there's the final thing. And it's so many people creating so many discussion posts about tier lists or general discussions about what the best games as a whole are, all the best songs, the best boss fights, the best stories, the best characters, the best fighting styles. So many of these posts chuck Judgment and Lost Judgment into the haven't played category, or they don't even think to mention a single thing about either of them. And the less and less people see of them, the more likely they are to omit the judgments from their own posts and whatever. They like to use the excuse of it's not a Yakuza game to exclude them from these tier lists. And sure, maybe you're someone who makes a tier list and you just didn't like Judgment or Lost Judgment because you're stupid, or all of your favorite songs are coincidentally just from Yakuza 0 or something like that. But surely not every single person on Reddit can somehow neglect to point out that this is the best fucking thing they've ever heard in their life. But of course, no matter how much convincing someone can do, no matter how long a video like this may be, people just choose to completely ignore something if it goes against their beliefs. It's of course not the entire community, because there exists people like me, who obviously love the 2 Judgment games and Gaiden, but the general community opinion, your average fan online, every bloody second goddamn post or comment I see on every bloody website ever, is that these 3 games are just not worth your time. And I'm telling you right now, as someone who has devoted his entire YouTube channel to these games for nearly 4 years now, that you are absolutely missing out on some of the greatest things ever. The best of the bloody best. Now, of course, there's stuff like the PSP Kuroyo games, which I'm sure it's probably accurate to say that like 1% of the community has played them, despite them being immensely fun. But with these 3 games I've been talking about, they're available on all the same modern platforms that the other modern games are on, and are frequently on sale, and yet they feel like they're just some obscure thing you gotta find a hidden treasure in a cave to be able to play or something. But you see, before he died, Toshihiro Nagoshi was lying there on his hospital bed. With his last breath, he grabbed my hand with a fading grip and said, "Please, promote the judgments with all of your heart." Or at least I think that's what he said. I don't speak Japanese. And I'm just going to pretend he also said Gaiden 2, even though that's like the first game he had 100% nothing to do with, but whatever. Because I'll defend and promote these games by sucking off all 3 of them until eventually there comes a day where everything about these 3 games is just common knowledge. Where there isn't any misinformation, where they show up in everyone's collections, where they're rightfully placed right at the fucking tippy top of everyone's sex playlist, where there is nothing but love for these 3 amazing games. Every game has flaws, some many, some only a few, but I'm telling you that no matter how big the flaws of these games may seem, they are absolutely worth it. I don't speedrun games or anything, and I only do second playthroughs for the purposes of recording stuff, so most of the games I've only beaten once or twice. But the thing with something like Judgment is that I have beaten it 5 times, and now I'm actually on my 6th. I wouldn't have done that if there wasn't something just so bloody amazing with it, right? Despite what people think, I am not legally obligated to play every single game in this franchise, and to be quite frank, some of them, were I not a YouTuber, I definitely would have completely ignored. I'm also not at all obligated to say anything positive about any of the games. If I wanted, I could just make videos about everything I hate from each game, but take this opinion from a single Aussie fan of a game franchise, as a single person who's played like thousands of other games in his relatively short life, as someone who only recommends things he likes to people he likes. As that fan, to anyone out there who is also a fan, please, for the love of Christ, go play any of these 3 games. Experience what happens when the writers pull their heads in and write their best story yet with Judgment. Experience the incredible ability of RGG Studio to make the gameplay of every single one of their games look like the work of amateurs by playing Lost Judgment. Experience the raw talent of these developers to create an entire masterpiece of a video game within only 6 months with Like a Dragon Gaiden. And experience the single greatest thing ever gifted to the human race, the game that will change your life forever, the game that has a soundtrack created by heavenly angels, a story created from the minds of every single renowned scholar throughout all of history, gameplay finely crafted by the finest engineers science has ever witnessed. Experience all of that with Final Fantasy XVI. Woo!